Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I see a few people are trickling in. We're going to give it a few seconds so that we make sure we have a good crowd before we kick things off. So hey Melissa, hey Lo, Cindy, Katie, Vanessa. Vanessa was part of our other session earlier. Vanessa Duran, Emily from El Paso.
Hi Vanessa.
Yeah, it's great to see some of these really familiar names. Al Flores, yay. And Sharon joining us from Hawaii. I'm so glad you could be part of this. Wonderful. Well, I'm not going to waste too much more time because I definitely want to make sure, thanks Vanessa, that we get to all the good content that Emily and Tom have planned. So I'm really pleased to kick off this final keynote for Virtual TRA Marketplace. I'm sure we wish it could go on another week or two. But really, this has been a very good week. I think we've all exchanged a lot of information, and we sort of left one of the best for last when it comes to these two presenters. They have a long history in the industry, both from the vendor side and education, and I know we're going to have a lot to share over what they've experienced as leaders of the two major parties when it comes to the association. So with us today, we have Mr. Tom Bené, who is the president and CEO of the National Restaurant Association. He comes to us from Cisco. He's only been in seat since June, so we're going to go easy on him. That's also not happening. But Tom is he's a great force. We're really excited to have him with us. And also leading the Fireside Chat is our own president and CEO, Dr. Emily Williams-Knight from the Texas Restaurant Association, and she had a very storied background in the education field before this. Before I kick things off, though, we do have a special message, and I think this is really perfect, honestly, as we sort of talk about the combination and the relationship between national and state and what that looks like. So we actually have a video message from Senator John Cornyn that I'm going to play for everyone right now.
Hi, I'm Texas Senator John Cornyn. Thanks for letting me be part of the Texas Restaurant Association Marketplace this year. I'm sure it looks a little different than last year's gathering, but I commend you all for holding it and learning some of the new best practices amid this new normal. Restaurants, of course, are a critical industry representing 51% of the food dollar in Texas and employing more than 1.3 million Texans. We know how important you are to our state as well as how hard hit restaurants have been by this coronavirus. I've led and supported multiple relief efforts for restaurants in Congress like liability protection, the Serve and Carry Act, the Restaurants Act, and the Paycheck Protection Program. We're not out of the woods yet, and nobody knows that better than you. And we must all do our part to support our Texas restaurants amid the uncertainty of the pandemic. On behalf of 29 million Texans, I want to thank you for keeping Texas fed. I hope you'll stay safe, keep up the great work, and I hope you'll be wide open soon.
That was a great message. While we're going through this, you guys, if you have any questions for Tom or Emily, please go ahead and add them in the chat or using the Q&A window. I think this is going to be a very insightful conversation. Dr. Knight?
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. And obviously, thank you, Tom, for being here. Certainly so glad to have you in seat as of June. I have a couple months on you, but I think both of us coming into a year of a pandemic was not maybe the story we would have written, but clearly I think have stepped up to the challenge. The national team, before we begin, I would just be remiss if I didn't thank the team that you have, because they have been extraordinary partners. And I think what we have seen is the relationship that the states, and there's 52 state, quote unquote organizations, and our ability to get down to the grassroots, whether it be L&J Cafe in El Paso, all the way up to a national chain. Through the relationship and the structure that we've built, all restaurants are covered. And I think that's very powerful. And we've seen that come to play. I think about Senator Cornyn and the role he has played with your team working on legislation, and then on the ground, our ability to mobilize sort of grassroots to get that over the line. So thank you so much for coming today. And I think, I want to start with, I think this may just from perspective to get back to where we started, which was when this hit in March, I think it was the 19th that dining rooms were closed in Texas. Some states maybe had closed before, but it was, 50,000 restaurants, doors closed, welcome to curbside and delivery. And that was just a snap moment. Everything changed forever. You weren't at the National Restaurant Association yet. You had been obviously chairman, president, and CEO at Cisco, had 20 plus years at PepsiCo. And we're sitting in March, probably thinking to yourself, what? Right? As someone who had so much time in the sector, looking forward to this role, what were you thinking at that moment? Have you had a chance maybe to reflect back on that?
Well, first of all, thanks, Emily, for having me. It's great to be here with you and everyone else. And you're right, that was a very interesting time. I was in the process of talking with the National Restaurant Association in this role and considering it. And I think at that time, there were a lot of people who thought, oh my gosh, he's going to step back, he's going to pause. What excited me about the opportunity in the first place is the industry. And you've said it numerous times already, but the passion that people have in this industry, the entrepreneurial spirit that exists. I mean, there's so many amazing things about this industry. And the last 10 years of my career, I've almost been dedicated there. So I was predisposed going through the process to feel like I could make a difference and I could help with my experience and background. And this almost added the third leg of the stool. I had the supplier side, the distributor side, but this was working closely with all the operators who were really on the front lines making things happen. As COVID hit and as we started to go through all the changes that we were all experiencing, both personally and in the industry, I think, as I said, people thought I might step back. And quite candidly, in my background, probably like yours, you don't necessarily run from challenges, you actually move towards them. And for me, I started to think even more that maybe my experience, my background, and my passion for this industry could actually help. And I don't think any of us could have predicted that we'd be sitting where we are today this long after. I think we all thought it was going to be a much shorter experience we were going to go through. But the reality is I wouldn't have changed anything. I'm very excited to be here. I'm learning a lot every day, and I'm glad to be on the front lines with you and the other states and fighting for this industry and doing what we know we need to do to get it back and get it back very successfully.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually think people have asked, how's the job going? What a first year. And I actually like the job better because I think before the pandemic, you're trying to create value. And I think what we have now is this opportunity to almost help the industry reshape itself, right? And help it sort of innovate and pivot. And that's certainly much more exciting because you can see the value that we're all playing across the country every day. So let's talk a little bit about where the industry sits right now, right? And so, as you said, and it's really not, it's not a one size fits all, right? Maybe you can share a little bit about that of navigating sort of the state perspective of, we didn't have a national closing and a national reopening. We still have states that dining is not allowed indoors. As you think about the role the national team has played, maybe reflect a little bit on sort of as an organization, the industry, where does it sit today and sort of maybe some of the things the association has done at a national level to help us move through this transition?
Sure. Well, let's go back to where one of the things you said in the beginning, which is this only works if national and states work collaboratively together. And Texas is a great example. And Emily, you have done an amazing job leading not only the state, but partnering with the national. And I go all the way back to PPP and one of the, the way that started. And it started with you in Texas and folks like John Cornyn saying, hey, we need to do something. And so the way this always tends to work is from the grassroots level. And that's true, I think, even from restaurants. Local restaurants oftentimes drive the innovation, the creativity, the things that happen more broadly in the industry. So it starts with that partnership between the states and national, and you guys have been amazing. So thank you for that. The reality is, it does differ state by state. And I think, depending on where you sit on things like, and it differs a lot depending on restaurant concept, right? Depending on what you were predisposed to pre-COVID, did you have delivery? Did you have takeout? Did you have drive-throughs? Did you have all those things that maybe made it easier in the most difficult times to get through it? But what we've seen is this evolution. And again, back to what's so great about this industry is this industry jumped to action right away. Many did things that they had never done before. Maybe that was adding delivery or takeout when they didn't have it before. The work you and others led around alcohol to go or cocktails to go. I mean, jumping in and trying to figure out how we can work together to get things right for the industry. Some of that was funding related, things like PPP. And as many of us know, PPP wasn't perfect the first time through, but what happened? The industry came back together, large operators, small operators, states, national, coming together to change that with the Flexibility Act and push forward things that were so important to the industry. So the industry is in a precarious place still, right? We've seen some progress in May and June, a little bit of pullback in some states in July. Certainly not where we want to be. We'd love to be fully reopened, but we need to certainly get to higher levels of capacity. We know that most restaurants can't operate below 75% capacity. We'd love them all to be back at 100. If you're in a state where you've worked great with your local whether it's your mayor or your just local agencies, to get more outside dining. That's been a real positive in many states. And I give credit to the states, I give credits to the local municipalities for working with the industry to create that environment where we can get through some of these more difficult times. But we still have a long way to go. And it's, I'd say it's choppy ahead. And we can go deeper on some of those things specifically, but we're certainly looking forward to more government support. We know the industry deserves it. We need it. And we're pushing hard for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of captures the innovation that we've seen, right? So I can tell you in Texas, I never could have imagined you could get a mixed drink in a cup sealed. We came up with a zip tie, right? And I always say now there's no zip ties in the state of Texas to safely put it in the trunk of your car and take it with you. But it's almost like the genie's out of the bottle and you can't put it back in. The consumer now expects that, right? They expect to be able to pick up their Mexican food with a great mixed margarita and then take it to go. And so I think what I, maybe talk a little bit about what I want to get into is we now have to make sure that statutorily, right, through the legislative process, that this stuff gets locked in. And so I can, from my seat, curbside alcohol to go has been a tremendous win for the states that have put it in. And we know a lot of restaurants have actually stayed in business by alcohol to go. The other one, though, is retail. And if you think about when we in Texas sort of started partnering with the governor's office and some of our legislators, because we realized that by closing dining rooms at 51% of the food dollar, we weren't going to be able to feed Texans just through grocery stores, right? Without that, and that supply chain was already being challenged. So maybe talk a little bit about the vision going forward of, we have this next congressional session, and I'm going to take us back to talk about what else may happen this year, but sort of how we can partner together to get all of these things like the parklets, right? All the regulatory things out of the way, maybe and locked in, that, we have a chance right now to do things and achieve things for the industry that have never happened before, because we've tested them and we've tried them and we see the merging of the supply chains. We see curbside alcohol, we see retail, so how do we make sure those things don't go away?
Well, as you said earlier, I think it's a collaboration. It's making sure we understand what all those most important drivers of success for our operators and our members are. So what are the things that are really going to sustainably make a difference long term? And I think you've named a few of them. And I think then it comes down to us working together. Certainly the states and grassroots level, the things that might bubble up and become a national agenda item, we need to make sure we're working hard on those. But it comes back to communication, collaboration, and it's again a great example, I think, of where Texas in particular and the national have worked so well. Our organizations are connected in so many different ways, whether it's the training and certification work that we do to make sure that restaurants had what they need to reopen successfully, or it's things around the type of legislation that's going to make a difference short-term and long-term. And you've talked about some of those. But everything from employee retention tax credits to wellness tax credits, and just making sure that we're working together, and that starts with understanding the issues. And I think the more we're both engaged with our members, and we are truly understanding the things that they're feeling and experiencing, and then when they go and innovate, how do we take those great innovations and build on them and expand on them? And it's going to take an all-out effort for both sides.
Absolutely. And I think what's been really special about this moment is that you're not identified by the kind of restaurant, right? And so we don't look at it as a single food truck all the way up to a large chain. When someone calls for help, we've been there, right? And so whether it's resources on the ground here or resources even in another state. And I think when we've seen the lines start to blur, and this is sort of a spoiler alert for later in our closing session, but we opened our marketplace event that we're sitting in right now. More than 2,300 people attended, which is, a great number to be online. But what's even more powerful is we had 6 different countries and 37 states that were able to kind of jump into this event. That would not have normally happened before, right? We all stayed in our little. So I think there is this opportunity that we've built these partnerships and trust, and that our members, they don't have to worry about, maybe I'm in this category, maybe I don't have drive-through. Well, we may have other resources for you, right, to move forward. So I think that's the exciting part, is that we've brought everyone together instead of keeping everyone in separate categories. And I just want to be sure we do that going forward, because many of these solutions are going to help all restaurants, right, not just one particular group.
I think that's so powerful. If I could just build on one point, and one of the things that I started talking about early days in this role is that we will be more effective and successful as one. And one, for me, I tried to articulate its independence, which means everything, to your point, from a food truck to a mom and pop that's operating in some smaller community. franchisees, because they need the help as well. And then certainly the chains. And while the chains sometimes have more resources at their disposal, they still are looking for support, both at the state level and the national level. And so one industry from the standpoint of operators, but also one industry, states and national working together. And I even take it as far, and maybe this is because of my background on the supplier and distributor side, but I think there's power in bringing together suppliers and manufacturers, distributors and operators, because we all fill that chain and we all touch so many different parts of the economy when you think about it that way. So I completely agree with you. And I think that we will be most successful when we continue to take that broad view, not recognizing we may not be able to be all things to all people, but there are many, many common issues that exist in this industry that I think we can do a lot with.
When you mentioned the supply chain, I think that's where your background is so valuable, because I was sitting on a different panel actually with one of the global consulting firms this week, and they are doing all this research about the supply chains themselves. And so if everyone remembers when we had grocery just flood and the restaurant channel essentially closed, other than what we could do, but really slowed that, our broadliners, right? Everything just backed up all the way, we think about in Texas, back to the farm. Well, the packaging requirements right now with the USDA differ between both of those supply chains. And so I think that this has also shown us that in a crisis, in some cases, that isolation actually made it very difficult for not only our suppliers, but also for whether it be restaurant, grocery store, retail outlet. And so how do we fix all that? And, hopefully in the next year or two, so we don't end up in a situation again where we can't simply pivot and our broadliners are struggling, because right now, the one thing they're telling us is even our restaurants, you can't predict demand. Right? So open today. I mean, I watched last night, I think it was the mayor of New York City who said, well, maybe I'll just take outdoor dining away. If I was a restaurant in New York City, how do I even forecast, right? How do I order? How do I partner with my supplier to kind of navigate that? And that uncertainty, I think we can partner on some of the regulatory legal things that we have to get done to make this just a lot easier for the whole system. And I will be remiss, I know you have a strong Cisco background as their former president, but our partners in the supply chain have been extraordinary. I mean, I just can't say enough, whether it be for us, Bené or Cisco or US Foods. I mean, just stepped up in a huge way with flexibility to help us sort of through the crisis. So I think you're right. That's that ecosystem that has become so valuable.
Oh, yeah.
So here, let's talk about the rest of this year. So we had a lot of hope, and I can tell you that I think my members would say there was one night I did a video the Thursday night that Congress left, and I said, at this point, I don't even know what to tell you anymore, because I keep saying it's coming. I feel good about it. I feel like we have the right energy. They're going to do something. Look at the numbers. And they flew home and nothing happened, right? And so I'm always super honest with our members and tell them the truth, right? Either we're going to get something or we're not. Even I thought we were going to get something over the line, and I know your team did too. What are you hearing right now? I mean, are we going to be able to get something done, you think, in September, maybe another PPP? Something to help the sector, because this recovery has just become so much longer than sort of the 2 to 6 weeks we were initially promised.
Right. Well, you and I and many others, I think, felt exactly the same way. We thought, surely they're going to do something before recession. Now, what I am hearing is, and there's a lot of articles out there right now. Clearly, there's this whole postal service issue that's being dealt with. But I think the point is, people are starting to say, if you're willing to come back to deal with this postal service, what about coming back and dealing with the economy, right? The bigger part of it, which needs to be solved for. And there's starting to be some conversation around that. And I think what might happen is after the Republican National Convention, so we're obviously getting through the Democratic Convention this week, Republican Convention's coming up. I think after that, there could be an opportunity to see them come back. And maybe that's the impetus to move some things forward here. I do think it's more than likely something around a PPP extension. What we've heard continuously is that the Congress is not looking to create new programs, but rather build and improve existing programs. And while that, it's frustrating at times when we think about the specific needs we have within the restaurant industry and the specific ask we've had around the Restaurants Act that was proposed by the Senate. The reality is, it's probably easier for them to get things done. They've grooved some things, they've learned some things. And so I think the likelihood of something that is more consistent with what they've already done is probably high. I think there are ways that within a new PPP, we still could benefit. There are some issues with the current discussion around PPP in the next round that are concerning, including the limits for folks who maybe got a prior loan, or the amount of loss that a restaurant would have had to shown to qualify. As we all know in this industry, our margins are so slim, you can't have a number like 50% loss, because many restaurants are unsuccessful at 25% or 15% loss. So we are pushing hard for those kind of changes to what we're hearing around PPP. But I do believe something will happen here. I think there's way too much understanding that this industry and others have been so significantly impacted. And the further this drags on, there's going to need to be more support. And as we were talking earlier, this industry in particular touches so much of the economy. What's 95 cents of every dollar going back into the communities that we work and operate in, that's powerful. And I think Congress is starting to recognize that, although I want to build on something you said, which is we cannot do enough about communicating about the industry. Look, people are only as good as the information they have. And I think we always have to recognize that not every politician knows everything at the detailed level about our industry that we all do, because we live it every day. So the more we can get all of our voices reinforcing the key points about the industry, that will make them smarter. And I've always believed that, with people having the right information, they will make better business decisions.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, we talk a lot here in Texas is things become a little bit more normal, whatever that means today, but our schools are starting to open, colleges are coming back, people are, you can see the traffic patterns start to increase. And the worst thing that could happen is for our elected officials to lose focus on the fact that we're still struggling, right? That we haven't brought back half the people that we furloughed or had to terminate due to COVID, that our restaurants are still sitting at 50% capacity, which to your point, Tom, they can't make money that way. And so I think that we together have to keep amping up the pain points and keep bringing real stories, which I think the national team has had such a good job of saying, hey, here's what this actually looks like on the ground. And so I think, especially in the next couple of weeks, and we do have an opportunity with this election to really give some of our elected officials an opportunity to stand out, right, by doing the right thing for small business. So I think I look forward to that too. In this sort of a suite of bills that came out, there was liability protection, and our own Senator, Cornyn, who had, I think, 2 or 3 bills actually this time to help the sector, which I just can't thank him and his team enough. He's been a champion for us. Liability protection, and it's really liability protection from either the federal level, and we know we've got a session coming up. So if we don't get it federally, we're going to have to make it part of our agenda here. But do you think that's something that could still cross the line? So there's sort of the funding side, but there are other pieces that may get passed as well. It's only of interest to us as much as that we don't want to fight drive-by lawsuits with the resources that we have as an industry, right? We know that causation is difficult, but we also don't have the resources as lawsuits start to come in saying, I got COVID at your restaurant. Any chance you think that may still happen this year, or is that more of a post-election?
I wish I had a crystal ball on this. Look, I agree 100% with the ask that we're all making. I think it's absolutely reasonable, and I'm always surprised in this space why there's not more legislation to protect businesses here, especially in a situation like this, because as we've talked, communication, good information is so important, and there's the ability to even understand whether someone contracted this at a certain location, set aside restaurants, any location, I think is highly suspect. So I think it's absolutely something that we believe needs to go through. Whether or not it happens in this session or not, I don't really know. I think it's there are people on both sides of this argument, as you know, and I think we just need to keep educating and reinforcing why we think this is so important.
Yeah, and that liability piece, I'm going to go to something I know you and I have shared a pretty strong I guess engagement on, and that's around some of the misinformation that has come out about the sector, right? And so we're the second largest employer, we're an easy target, everyone has a restaurant, so it's pretty much mainstream media. And we've had some articles that have come out, or here in Texas, as I raised to you, we had the Texas Medical Association put out a chart that essentially ranked activities, and restaurants were an 8 out of 10 for risk. And we challenged that because we believe in data and evidence. And of course, it came back that they didn't have the data to support it, and it sort of went away. But we can't run from the fact that even at 50% capacity, the narrative that is out there in some cases that restaurants are unsafe is a challenge. And so maybe talk a little bit about, I know the association's been very aggressive when they have these articles come out of asking for that evidence-based background, but maybe just give a little bit of your perspective. I've been really proud of the way the NRA has stepped up in this moment, because we can't let this become sort of the sector become the whipping boy when there is no evidence that restaurants are the problem.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank you again. I mean, it takes the states being willing to share that information. And that was a great example with the Texas Medical Association, what came out, because sometimes we see those things, sometimes we don't. And we even had one yesterday that came out of Philadelphia, and I sent it to your counterpart in Pennsylvania and said, how would you like us to engage on this topic? Because we clearly disagree. It's not factual. And you're right. We have to go and start with facts. And I think the unfortunate thing about this pandemic is partly because early days, I don't think there was a lot of facts to know. Everyone was learning on the fly. But as we've gotten more information, it's very frustrating and disheartening when you see reports come out that are completely either fabricated or just are not based in fact. And that's not to suggest that there haven't been some bad actors in the industry. And look, when that happens, that's always going to draw media attention. So I think from our own side, we have to hold ourselves to a very high standard that we're doing everything we can to make sure we're following reopening guidelines, whether those were federal or state guidelines. But I got to tell you, and I know you do the same, I'm eating out at restaurants 4 or 5 nights a week, and was at one last night. And I think restaurants are doing a fabulous job of following the guidelines. So the reason we feel comfortable pushing back so hard when we see those things is for that very reason. One other thing I'd add is we are, again, back to communication and having the dialogue. We had a call with Dr. Birx last week, and it was incredibly helpful. And I give her a ton of credit because she was willing to listen, willing to engage with us, and even offered, as she was doing more of her travel around the states, to reinforce some of the same points. As an example, one of the things we just said to her, because her voice is very powerful, is please separate bars and restaurants when you're talking about the issues. Not that a lot of our restaurants don't have bars, and we need to make sure that we're doing the right things for them, but don't lump them together, because when a media article comes out about a bar that was doing something wrong, you can't paint a broad brush and assume that that's everybody who's in the bar or restaurant business. And she was very thoughtful, and she said she'd do that. She offered to help talk to mayors and local politicians about providing more outdoor space so that restaurants could survive during this time. So I think getting to the right people, reinforcing the message, using facts, as you said, is the thing that will always position us in the right place. And so I think it's just a constant, I hate to say it's vigilance around these bad reports that come out, making sure they know we're not going to let them go, and partnering together between the national and the states to keep our eyes open on this stuff.
Yeah, and Tom, you're exactly right. And anyone listening, please make sure as you see these come out, if you see something in your local paper, you see a study, you see something on social media, just simply forward it, whether it be the state you're sitting in right now watching or directly to the National Restaurant Association. But we want to know, because we will engage. And I think it's really important to say this is where we all have state protocols, and we all have to be committed to following them. We're not going to be perfect. I know we had 50,000 restaurants in Texas. We're not going to be 100% perfect every time, but doing 100% of the right thing the right way will make sure that these articles begin to slow down. And I think that's the key. But we're fearless down here. We're going to call them out because it's too damaging to a restaurant. We know, and I don't know if you saw this nationally, Tom, but we had cases where cities would text message every single resident to say, and I quote, "COVID is spreading, get in your homes now." So whether we're at 50%, 25%, 100%, people were not going out, right? And so this is where we need to keep having that partnership at the federal and state level, so people know that we can be their safe partner in recovery, that we have a job generation, generating, and not only that, but also our tax contribution, right, to these states that have been decimated through the crisis. It was like $7 billion just in mixed beverage tax in Texas that we contribute. So we know that in mixed beverage and sales tax, we know that we're a pretty important part. And so, I think you're right. And I just think we need to not back away from this stuff. So I appreciate the stance that you've taken as well. Let's talk about 2021. It's actually not that far away. We are sort of looking at a recovery period, which some are projecting could be 2022, 2023. And again, as you said, depending on the part of the equation you're in, if you're running 3 drive-through lanes, don't have to open your dining room because sales are so strong, it's very different than a fine dining restaurant that relies on business travel, in order to fill. And so talk to me a little bit about, as you look at 21, maybe some of the priorities for the association. Are there things that you and the team are already thinking about? Our priorities, either legislatively, but also, as most people know, the products and services that come out of the national are market leading, and many of our most of our restaurants use them. And so maybe just give us a little bit of peek of what's coming.
Sure. Let me start with where we were just talking, which is one of the things that's still to come this year, which I think is important, is what will bring people back out is confidence. And I think confidence comes in multiple ways, right? It comes in, how do they feel about the environment they're operating in? And then how do they feel about the locations they're going to? And as we said, restaurants have done a great job, at least the ones I've been in, of trying to create and instill that confidence. Having said that, we need a broader message. So something that is coming out very shortly in partnership with the federal and the states, and also with many of our suppliers in the industry, is something called the Serve Safe Dining Commitment. And the dining commitment is all about helping consumers. So there'll actually be a media campaign that says to consumers, it kind of shows the sights, the sounds, of a restaurant. And look, I don't think there's any one of us or any consumer out there who isn't missing that opportunity to get back out there with their family and friends, but they want to feel safe and they want to be comfortable in doing so. So part of what this does is it partners with the restaurant community to say, and to tell consumers very directly, you can go out comfortably because you can rest assured the restaurants have done all of these things. And there's a checklist of things that will be reinforcing to the consumer. There's a website where consumers can actually go and look and see which restaurants have signed up for the dining commitment. So it's a 360-degree kind of view of there's interest in getting out. We're going to reinforce the importance of safety and cleanliness and certainly creating a great environment. And then the restaurants will be able to articulate, here's what we actually have done in our locations. We're hopeful that that starts to build some of that confidence that we think is necessary to get consumers more comfortable, because there are many who aren't. And I think that's why you get these projections that are out there further. But as I think about the things we're working on, certainly the legislative agenda continues to be very important. Not knowing what's going to happen in this election year, we need to be proactively talking about that. And I know we already are with many of the states. So it's a state and a national agenda that could evolve or shape differently based on what happens. So that's a big part of what we're focused on. Around training and certification, we've learned a lot during this time. The great news is this industry has such a fabulous history of training and certifying. And so we already have a high standard we live to. What we've had to do is pivot more online from being in person. And so we've kind of moved to this hybrid approach. And I think that's probably where this thing will land. There are still many individuals who want to do it in person and take an in-person exam, but many others who say, I'm going to do it online. I'm more comfortable in that environment. So we've evolved the training and certification work we do to be more hybrid approach, which I think is important. We're also trying to create the environment where there's more tools and resources for the restaurant industry, regardless of the type of restaurant you are, and making sure that we're listening at a national level, and again, partnering with the states, as you guys listen to your members, around what are the things that people need going forward. There's all kinds of potential new ways of doing business. I think we're all learning as we go, as we've been talking about, whether that's the delivery, the alcohol, all those things. So we want to be listening very intently around what are the needs of the operators broadly and making sure we're creating programs, information, insights, resources to be able to support the restaurant industry as they continue to think about evolving their business. And I know that will be very much in partnership with the states because we touch different level of members. And one of the things that I know you reinforce all the time, and I can't reinforce enough, is this idea that whether you're a state member or a national member, this idea, if you join one of the associations, you've joined all of the association. And so the idea that you have access to anything that we're doing nationally, if you're part of the state association and vice versa, I think is really powerful. And I hope people realize that and take advantage of that. And I know you in Texas do a fabulous job of making sure everybody's aware of that.
Yeah, and Tom, I think that's where we could just even reinforce further, right? Because I think I still probably have members that don't know. We try to, I don't think there's been a night that's gone by where I haven't had a federal update, right? And it's really through the partnership with the team on the ground in DC, through their ability to call and say, hey, we've got corn and we can't get crews. Can you guys get some pressure? There's that dialogue, but then at the same time, all the resources that come out of national, I think, are so incredibly valuable to our members. And we like to say, whether you are sitting in Houston, where Melissa is our executive director in that region, and so we've got your local, we had Mayor Turner this morning on a call, then you go to the state level, we've had a number of legislators all week, including our partnership with the governor. And then when we think about what's happening, and I look at our role with all of you is to be your eyes and ears on the ground, right? Is to say, this is where we're hurting, this is where the winds are shifting, and also supporting those candidates, right, that we want to make sure end up in Washington to help all of you. The one thing I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about is, and I think so I've been just a really proud member of the board of the Education Foundation. And I thought we as an association, and then obviously the foundation, when this hit, thought, okay, we've got to do something in our foundation, which is really a workforce development arm. And we created a fund, and we're able to give out about $2.5 million in grants to just independent restaurants in Texas, because you could see right away they didn't have the resources, the liquidity, the access, right, economies of scale to sort of survive this at an early front. And just the notes you get back about even, $2,500 to $3,000 can make such a huge difference. At the same time, the Education Foundation team, which is just such an impressive team, kind of pivoted, and they created a fund. And I think we were well north of $20 million, and it went to employees. So maybe talk a little bit about the Education Foundation and its role in this, not only the recovery efforts, but just what you did for employees of the sector, and maybe a little bit as we go forward of the vision for that, because that's just growing like crazy and doing so much good.
Well, I really appreciate that. You're right. It's a part of what we do that oftentimes doesn't get talked about. But the Educational Foundation is really, as you said, workforce development focused. And it's everything from how do we make sure that everyone feels comfortable entering this industry, and how do we create the environment, especially maybe for some of those underdeveloped sectors of the United States, make sure that those individuals feel like this can be and could be a great place for them to enter, first and foremost. Secondly, it's around how do we help bring them along, whether it's through educational programs like mentorships or sponsorship programs. And certainly scholarship plays a big part in that. And we look to a lot of different segments of the population. We have military programs. We have even programs for people who've been incarcerated. So we're always looking for ways to bring people into this industry and give them an opportunity to get back on their feet. And I would argue this is one of the greatest industries of moving people from maybe a lower class position in their life to a middle or upper class role. There are huge examples, and mine included, where people start in food service, maybe in the back of the house somewhere as a dishwasher in my case, and you have a chance to work your way through and have the opportunity to ultimately maybe own and operate, or certainly be a part of the food service industry. So the Educational Foundation is an enabler for a lot of that. The fund you talked about was the Restaurant Employee Relief Fund, and we were very fortunate that the guy Fioretti, he was very interested and instrumental in getting kind of the consumer communication out there and making everyone aware. And we had sponsorship from many corporations to many individuals who donated, and to your point, raised over $20 million for employees. And these were scholarships. We gave over 45,000 scholarships, I believe is the number, around the US. Actually, we weren't scholarships, it's wrong. It's a grant. It was a grant. And that grant was basically to help people who had been impacted through employment during this time, the opportunity to have a little bit of money to help them get through. And that's just one example of the work that we are doing there. The other thing that's happening is as we think about even the racial inequality issues that are out there right now, we're also looking at new ways. We're partnering with the government and certain corporations who are interested in doing more in this area. And we believe it's yet another opportunity to bring resources to these underdeveloped communities and make sure that they have access to resourcing, whether it's mentorship programs, scholarship programs, ways to help them and the industry get through some challenging times we're all experiencing.
Yeah, and that work at the foundation will be so important going forward too. As you think about, I think about in Texas, we have about 175 districts with our ProStart students. And just overnight, they got cut off. And it was easy, not easy, we've seen school districts struggle, but to move to online for English or history, but moving a CTE program totally online when these students are used to being hands-on in the classroom. How do we make sure those students don't look at sort of some of the carnage of the sector and look at more of an opportunity to come into a sector that's evolving, right? And we don't lose that future workforce. And to your point, my fear is when we've got about 500,000 people still on the sidelines in Texas, we had about up to 700,000 that were furloughed or lost their jobs. We've gained some back. Hopefully if we keep going through our opening, we're kind of in a good spot of our we had a kind of an opening and then a setback, and now we seem to be kind of flattening that curve. How do we get that talent back? And then how do we likely accelerate the technology, the digital skills? That profile of that employee may shift depending on the role of ghost kitchens and virtual kitchens, and so much is going to come out of this. So yeah, I didn't want to miss just the work and that kind of investment in employees across the sector. I just thought was so commendable. And I know from I would, definitely want to say from our fund, we still have restaurants, independent restaurants in need. So anyone who's still looking, that fund is still open, and we want to get these independent restaurants over the line. So let's talk just for a second, a little bit about I guess sort of the partisanship. One of the things when I stepped in, Texas is obviously a state that's always been pretty red. I call it a little more purple now, and we have our city outliers. And you sort of, I realized right away that it was going to take all of us. And Sharon Van Meter, I think, posted an interesting question, and she's the chairwoman of our foundation here in Texas. And one of the things she asked is, do we have enough relationships essentially on both sides of the aisle? And I would say we've done a lot of work with our new head of government affairs in Texas to be sure, because it is going to take both. In some cases, we've had webinars with Republicans and Democrats because we think that this shouldn't be an issue where we're fighting against each other for partisan reasons instead of trying to get actually these restaurants, because healthy restaurants are going to bring back all those employees, which is a win for everybody. So maybe just talk a little bit about how NRA, and Sharon's question, is positioned going forward. And I know I can't say NRA, so National Restaurant Association is positioned going forward to make sure that we have that mutual support. And I think some of the PPP work we can demonstrate, but I think that might be a good talking point.
Sure. Well, I think to the point that was made in the question asked, I think it's a really important question, which is it is going to take bipartisan support going forward. I think that's going to be critical for us and for the industry. And I think we have a responsibility in that to make sure that we have that outreach. I would say at the National Restaurant Association, our government affairs team and public affairs organization has done a nice job of trying to support both sides and have built some pretty good relationships. Not only with the House and Senate and the various leaders, but I think also within the peripheral organizations that ultimately drive policy oftentimes. So the Department of Labor, certainly CDC and USDA and FDA and all of those organizations that are also very important. The one thing that's very important, as we all know, to help with that, both at the federal and at the state level, is to have a very active and successful PAC. And the PAC allows you to be able to donate across that aisle to make sure you're putting the money where you think the most impact can be had. And so we are constantly working on that on a national basis. I'd say it's an opportunity for us, candidly. And I know many states have very strong PACs, and I think that's really important as well. So I would say federally, we're feeling pretty good as we go into the end of the year here. Always room for improvement. And I think to your point, many states have done a very nice job in that area. I can't really speak to all of them and know where they're all at, but I think it is very, very important. And I think we have to be an industry that brings solutions as well. And I think we have in the past, so I'm not suggesting we haven't, but I think when you're going through an environment like we are today, we have to not only, bring the needs and asks that we have, but along with that, we have to bring recommendations and solutions. And I think we're doing a pretty good job in that area. And you can see that in how many of the leaders have accepted our efforts in partnership, whether that was with CDC or FDA, or even with some of the states, as we've talked about already.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for bringing up the PAC, because I think it's critical. And for Texas, it's going to be a very significant, but also the Traction Fund. And so we've created a Traction Fund. And I want to remind everyone, this is a moment in time that doesn't happen very often, right? So we've gotten incredible goodwill, incredible empathy from both the consumer and our elected officials. And everyone's trying to figure out, how do you save Texas restaurants at the national level? How do you save restaurants? Well, we need to capitalize on that. So there's never been a more important time. And Tom, I've shared with your team, we're happy to hold those PAC events here in Texas. We know what that means. The relationships, it helps us on the ground as it helps you, but also for those listening, that Traction Fund, which is going to allow us to get alcohol to go solidified, retail, potentially some mixed beverage tax relief, right? Regulatory, statutory definitions of what is a restaurant. So we don't go through this. Are you a restaurant? Are you not a restaurant? We have so much to accomplish, and we have one session every 2 years to do it here. And so I just want to encourage everyone, you've got to get behind these, whether it be federal or state PACs and traction funds, because that's what's going to give us the resources. And if we miss this window, at least in Texas, Tom, 2 years is a very long time, and a lot can change. And we need to build and sort of take advantage of the empathy and goodwill. And frankly, our restaurants have stepped up huge, right? Close your dining room, but stay open to feed Texans. Don't make any money, and maybe we'll get you some help, right? And they've done it with sort of grit and I think and humbleness, and have done a remarkable job. And so we need to almost cash that in the next session to make sure that we get the work done. So I just want to make that call to action, whether it be federal or state. That PAC and traction is critical. So what about challenges for restaurants? And then we'll get to some of the Q&A questions, right? So you've had a really interesting background, and you can see it from, you've looked inside a lot of restaurants. You've been on the supply side, whether it be with Pepsi, as you said, or with Cisco. What do you think the greatest challenge right now is for restaurants? As we sit right here, we're still in that like uncertainty of the unknown. what do you see as going to be the greatest challenge? And maybe separate them by category if that's easier. But as you look down that runway, sitting there as an operator, maybe what's going to be the greatest challenge for them to get back to those pre-COVID sales, or, you know, thriving like they were then?
Well, I think the first we've talked a lot about, which is we've got to create the environment where consumers feel safe. I mean, for guests to come in and to enjoy a meal in a restaurant, to do what they want to do, there is a certain portion of the population that needs to feel comfortable and safe. And part of that we own, part of that, you know, unfortunately, we may be waiting for a vaccine for some people to get to that place. But I think it's just making sure we're doing everything from a cleanliness, from a training, certification, and communication standpoint is very, very important. Second, I do think the challenge around labor is going to be out there. It's going to be real. It's something I think we have to pay attention to towards the end of the year. Everything from wage rates to making sure that we're creating the environment, as we've talked, where people see value and opportunity still in this industry. And I think that's something that we're going to have to all work together on. We know that good employees are critical to the success of any operation. And so I think that's going to continue to be a focus area. And then I think lastly is just being, as we always have, nimble and flexible. And I think that's what this industry is so good at, because I can't sit here today and tell you exactly what the industry is going to look like 6 months or a year or 2 years from now. But what I do know is that we have a lot of entrepreneurial people in the industry who have been thoughtful in the past, who are, you know, skilled at trying to find ways to create the value for their guests. And if you think about what drives this industry, I don't think it's changed a lot over the years. People love the convenience that comes with being able to go out, meaning not always having to cook at home and make a meal at home, but also that experience. People go out for an experience. And whether that experience is great food or that experience is being in a fun place to hang out with their friends and family, that's what this industry is all about. And when consumers feel confident, meaning they feel good about the dollars in their pocket or the environment that they're in, they will go out and experience those things. So, you know, lots of things could change, but I think the great news is we're well poised for those changes. And I'm excited for the industry. I believe firmly that we will come out of this, and we will continue to evolve and be strong.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, one of our members who's a consultant had posted something, and, you know, we're going through so much content right now, but it caught me and it said, you just emotionally and physically are only able to be in a crisis mode for a certain period of time. And then you have to go into a mode of, what am I going to do next? And I feel like as an industry, we need to transition from the shock and awe of what happened, the pain of loss, really, because we try to tell our members, we're never going to go back to March 18th or March 1st, right? That's over. It's never going to look like that again in that same form and fashion. And there's got to be some kind of process of letting go. And then, as I think the associations, you know, creating that playing field, which is the legislative and regulatory roadmap for them, and then bringing in all that new innovation and helping them see that they may have been a mom and pop restaurant that only could imagine 5 tables and a sit down, right? But what has happened in these last couple of months that lets them see that maybe something is different, maybe their consumer wants something different. I actually think, Tom, we can actually extend the life cycle of so many of these restaurants by helping them bring these tools and resources through the Nationals products, you know, and services team, to sort of reimagining what this landscape is going to look like. I mean, I've never done more to go curbside and had more inconsistent experiences in my life, right? So there's sort of this fine tuning that's going to happen. And like you, I see it as a chance for us to kind of lead the charge versus trying to get everyone through it and back to what used to be, because I don't know if you agree, but I just don't think it'll ever be there again. I don't see it.
Yeah.
So, and Anna, do you want to jump up for a couple questions or?
Yep. Hello. Okay, great. Actually, there we go. All right. I thought Sharon's question was really great. We did have another question come in from Al Flores in Houston, and he was asking for a little bit more. I mean, Tom, you kind of touched on it, on the communication between the very small metro level all the way to national and back down. We have, I mean, 23 different chapters around the state, and some of them are really small. Houston is actually very well connected and pretty big, but some of the ones, you know, down in Rio Grande Valley and out in Midland, Odessa, like in the desert, what is the best communication platform that you guys are working on right now to help members at all level understand what's going on nationally?
Well, I think there are I think one of the challenges we have is there's a lot of communication, and I think streamlining some of that may actually help us in the future. I'm sure, like many, when you get too many things hitting you from too many different places, especially if they're disparate, you start to pick and choose, and you might miss some of the things that are most important. So I would say that, many states, and I think Texas does a nice job here, takes what we do and then packages it up and gets it right back out to the members. And I think that's probably the quickest, easiest way to do it, versus trying to have people sign up for a lot of different state communication platforms that are out there, or sorry, national communication platforms that are out there. But it's probably an opportunity area. We should talk more about it, and I'm very open to that. I think that making it easy for anybody who's a member at a state to see everything we're doing nationally, whether it's access to the research we do or the insights that we have, we've got to get really grooved at that, because I do believe in this join one, join all mindset, and I think it's very powerful.
It is very powerful. And I'd also remind Al that Emily's email that we work very hard on every night is also the best place for you to go and find that source of information, because Emily repackages it very, very well. So Al, make sure that you're still subscribed to that. I think that would be really helpful. I think what you're mentioning about the research is going to be key for us, Tom. I know it's something that our members ask for all the time, and particularly our media partners ask for all the time. They're always looking for more localized information from the community level to the state level, and then of course national as well. So whatever the research department can do, I know they're only so big and can only handle so much. That would be fantastic. Emily, don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, and I think you know this, right? And when we get Hudson's research, or that team's research, especially when it showed, and I think something came out this week, which was like 87% of Americans, the thing they miss most is eating in dining rooms, right? Or one of the ones that really drove the legislators to understand the pain was, I think it was like 90% of operators, and don't quote me because I don't have it in front of me, but it was an extraordinary high percentage said they won't break even this year, right? That is so powerful. And so Anna's right. And that's where, and I just try to remind people, that's where we do our state surveys, but we can give a legislator a national perspective. It is that your research and data team is phenomenal. And I think you're right. It's going to raise in importance, and our access to that, Tom, is critical for the states, because it tells the story and it makes it real, and people love numbers, right? Versus just painful stories help the emotion, but that data is critical. So definitely want to keep that going, because it is, when we get those little tidbits from you, we leverage them like crazy to make sure people understand that either it's good or bad, right? And the same with some of your partners, whether it be Winsight or Black Box, or, when they pass things through, it also helps us figure out where to put our energy, and so when we're thinking about legislatively, when you look at some of the alcohol numbers, you think about, we better get this done next session, right? Because this matters to restaurants. So I think, Anna, that's a great point to bring up.
It's an area you're gonna see us invest even more, and I've identified it as certainly an opportunity area. We do great work, but I always say, when there's huge pull for something, you've hit a hot button, and so there's a lot of pull for it, and we need to make sure that team's resourced appropriately to get the kind of continued insights that we need.
That would be, you're welcome, Bruce and Hudson, from your friends in Texas. Hopefully Tom's going to take care of that for you. We do have another question that I think is very pertinent right now too, Tom, is how do we unite the industry? We know that all restaurants are very valuable to the American people, but there does seem to be this little bit of tug of war between independent chain, small chain, regional chain. What is mom and pop? What is your perspective on that from the national level?
Well, candidly, it's been a little surprising to me. And the reason I say that is because, as a supplier and then as a distributor, all customers were important. And I think that they had different needs for sure, but they were all very important. What I've struggled with a bit is understanding what is creating some of that. And I think some of it is perception, very candidly. I think there's a perception in some's mind that the national only represents certain, segments of the industry. I think, and what I've said to many who've asked that or pushed on that, I've said, I think you're getting confused somewhat with the membership model versus what we actually focus on. Because we would articulate and say, and I have many proof points, that we support the entire industry. Much of our advocacy efforts is supporting the entire industry. There are certain topics for sure that is not going to be equally as important to all, and we understand that. Or that might even create an environment where some may be on opposite ends of an argument because of the type of restaurant they are. But I would highly argue, and I think we could demonstrate that there is a very large portion. I would bet 70+% of everything we do is applicable to all restaurants, back to the research or back to training and certification. These are things that should unite us, not pull us apart. And so my goal and my hope is that we can start to create forums to have those conversations. And I believe communication will help us a lot here, being open to each other, clarifying what we're actually talking about, and being very specific by creating forums where people can voice their opinions and points of view. And that will allow me and the national to start to understand that and then work with the states who may need our support as well. But it's really a bit confounding to me because I don't think it should be that way. And it's certainly something new that I've never experienced before. And so that's at least my perspective. Emily, you may have a different or additional thought on it.
Because I think throughout my day, I move between the different entities so quickly that I don't think about who they are. I just think they're a restaurant operator in need. And so I've never classified them separately. I do think, one of the things I saw very powerful is when we were trying to get Texas reopened before we got the signal from the governor, it's always better to write the rules before someone creates the rules. And so we assembled a team of top chain leaders, so some of the biggest chains in the nation that are here in Texas and are independents. And we had, I think, 14 or 15 of those folks for several days building the reopening guidelines. And what you found is that some of the things that we may have wanted to do where the chains may have had those resources, our independents can implement, or some of the things the independents wanted to do wouldn't have been able to get through the system and the chain. So we actually came up with this great reopening that we were really humbled that other states adopted as well. But it was really that all voices at the table. And I think the empathy that was created by that, but the knowledge sharing, those folks are now all within the same group, right? And so I think there is an opportunity through the crisis to bring everyone back together and to show that, yes, there may be issues that we're going to be totally divided, but I'm with you, Tom. I think they're far and few between. And the greater good is if you have the second largest industry all marching in the same direction, that's unstoppable. We had a congressman, I think it was a congressman yesterday, who said, just so you know, your industry is the loudest voice at the Capitol, and we want to hear that from every elected official, because it's hard to push us away when we're all coming with the same energy.
I thought a great example of this very quickly is that President's Roundtable. In that meeting, those that watched it or had a chance to be part of that, going into getting the changes in the Flexibility Act, you had chains, independents, franchisees, everyone was around that table. And if you recall that session, there were attempts to see if they could fracture or fragment the ask within that room. And when the team came together and all asked for the exact same thing, which was an extension from 8 weeks to 26 weeks or 24 weeks, that literally they were pushing like, is that really what you want? You don't want 30, you don't want 12? And they said, no, that's the number we want. Guess what? We got that number. And I think that's a great example of when we can find the common ground, there is huge progress that we can make together. And I'm certainly hopeful. I believe that it's just a matter of getting the right people together and having the right conversations, and we'll get there.
Yeah, me too. And there doesn't always need to be a winner and loser, right? I mean, I think we can all win. I think that's the assumption I think we need to keep making, is that we can all get through it together and be stronger for it. Tom, I know we only have a couple minutes left in. If there's any other questions, and if not, I'll let Tom make some closing remarks.
There actually is one question, and it was actually sent to both of you, is where do you see your respective associations a year from now or 2 years from now? That might be too big of a question.
I'll go first. I think I don't want someone to open a restaurant in Texas without being a member of the Texas Restaurant Association. I want everyone who comes to this great state, and we know that we've gotten tremendous interest of companies moving in or restaurants moving in. I want them to join the TRA, which includes the national team, and to be that source from day one. So helping them through the permitting and the licensing and how they set up their business and how to avoid some of the pitfalls, to supporting them in the legislature. I think we have such an opportunity. We've got an 85-year history here and tremendous success. And I think being in Texas, we're the second largest for restaurants. I fully expect us to be number one. We have a great supportive legislature, pro-business governor, and I think that we can get there. And so for the association, we've created tremendous value. And frankly, I think we feel part of the industry. We feel as if every day we get up, we do our job on behalf of every single one of the people that are across the state. And we don't want that to stop. And so I think you're going to see, we've seen a great increase in membership, which I think is remarkable, especially during a pandemic. And I just see us becoming the louder that we can get, the stronger we are, and to be that force that we want to be in Texas. So I'm excited. And I actually think the pandemic from an association standpoint has been so valuable because it's really shown us where our efforts need to be, right? Which is on the political side. Believe it or not, we provide a lot of comfort. That sounds soft, but it's mattered that we can dig in with everyone and say, we know this is painful, but we're going to get through it. And we just want to be that sole source for every restaurant in the state of Texas. And I think we can get there.
And I don't think I could say that much better other than to say that I aspire to have every restaurant operator participate in the association. What I mean by that is if you're a local, you should be part of the state. And if you're a national, based on our membership model, you should be part of national. It's incumbent upon us in the national and the states to create the value that you see. But I believe we are creating much of that value, as Emily articulated. That's why we see membership going up. And I think we need to work hard to continue to demonstrate that there is huge value by being part of this. And when you do, you'll see the benefits come back tenfold, because just as we are right now, people are seeing the benefits of being part of something bigger than just themselves. And they're hopefully also seeing that their voice will and can make a difference. And so I have the same aspiration. I'd love to see every restaurant participate in the association, state or national, wherever you're best suited, and take advantage of all that's out there.
Yeah, and it's becoming a little more fun too, right, Tom? And I think that's part of it too. I mean, we're in a great industry, and I think for us, we've been able to get out a little more down here in Texas now. And when you go into these restaurants and you see the people that we've been able to meet over email or these webinars, and they're in the trenches doing what they do. And it just is so inspiring. And I have to say, there's a sense of accountability from the national and state teams now that was probably always there, but is so much more apparent because these are people's lives and it matters. And so I think that's the fuel I think is going to keep us all going. And, I just will close by saying, Tom, I just can't say enough about your team. We're so glad you're here. Being new in my first year, if I didn't have the national team to help guide through some of this, it would have been so much more challenging. And so I know it's just the beginning, but I just want to say thank you, and please thank your team, because it makes a big difference to the folks on the ground.
Well, thank you. And I likewise, I've been here 2.5 months at this point, and the leadership that you, Emily, for the state of Texas have driven and provided is significant. And as you've heard me say earlier, I have benefited personally from that, and we as a national have benefited from the great work you guys are doing in Texas. So I think the more we can work together and continue to keep those lines of communication open and create the value that all of the members want, it's going to be a win-win, and certainly we're going to get to where we all want to go. So thanks for including me today. I love being part of this, and I'll look forward to meeting many of you in person at some point.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Anna.
Thanks.
Everyone have a great day. Have a great weekend. It's Friday.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Talk soon. Bye.